In a moment, Sydney grabbed a cast iron skillet and struck her mother on the head. She screamed, a cry of shock and pain. But Sydney didn't stop. She dropped the skillet and seized a steak knife, stabbing her mother nearly 30 times in the neck and head.
Wait, she's on the ground. So there's...
Who is it?
My mom! Someone broke in the back window.
All right, hold on.
And she's on the ground. And she told me to get out. And then I heard screaming. So I came back and she was on the ground.
Oh, we just got
Dad. I'm the dad.
Okay,
Sydney.
what's-
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Daddy!
What? What the hell? Where's my wife?
The window's broken, Dad!
Where?
In the heart of Akron, Ohio, a quiet suburb filled with ordinary lives, a tragedy unfolded that would shock a community and tear a family apart. Brenda Powell was a woman who radiated warmth, a dedicated mother, a respected professional, and a pillar of stability. But in March 2020, her life was brutally cut short by the person she loved most, her own daughter Sydney. This is the story of a mother's love, a daughter's unraveling, and a crime that left a city asking, how could this happen? Stay with us as we unravel the heartbreaking tale of Brenda Powell's murder, a story of trust, betrayal, and the fragile line between love and loss. Brenda Powell was the kind of woman who made everyone feel seen. At 50 years old, she had built a life rooted in care and compassion. A health services coordinator at Akron Children's Hospital, Brenda spent her days ensuring families received the support they needed. Colleagues described her as a steady hand, always ready with a kind word or a solution to a problem. She wasn't just good at her job, she was exceptional, the kind of person who made a hospital feel like a home. But Brenda's heart truly belonged to her family. She and her husband Stephen had been married for over 2 decades, building a life together in a modest Akron home. Their pride and joy was their only child, Sydney, a bright young woman with dreams of her own. Brenda was the quintessential proud mom, always boasting about Sydney's achievements, from her high school successes to her enrollment at Mount Union University. Friends said Brenda's love for Sydney was boundless. She'd do anything to see her daughter shine. Yet beneath this picture of a perfect family, there were quiet struggles. Brenda juggled the demands of her career with her role as a supportive mother, always striving to give Sydney the best opportunities. She was the glue that held their family together, the one who kept everything steady. But no one could have predicted that the very bond she cherished most would lead to her undoing. What happens when the person you love most becomes the one you fear? Sydney Powell, at just 19, seemed to have it all. A freshman at Mount Union University, she was bright, ambitious, and carried the hopes of her parents on her shoulders. In high school, she'd been a star, popular, involved, the kind of kid who made her parents proud. But college was a different story. Away from home, Sydney began to struggle. Her grades plummeted, and by her second year, her GPA had fallen to a shocking 0.07. She was failing, and worse, she was hiding it. Sydney didn't tell her parents about her academic troubles. Instead, she stayed on campus pretending everything was fine. She went to classes she was no longer enrolled in, kept up appearances, and lived a lie. But why? Was it shame? Fear of disappointing her parents? Or something deeper, something no one saw coming? Friends later said Sydney seemed anxious, but no one suspected the storm brewing inside her. Mental health experts would later diagnose Sydney with anxiety, borderline personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and even schizophrenia. But back then, these struggles were invisible, buried beneath a facade of normalcy. Sydney was a young woman teetering on the edge, and the weight of her secrets was about to push her over. How does a bright young woman go from college dreams to a moment of unthinkable violence? The answer lies in a single devastating day. March 3rd, 2020 started like any other day in the Powell household. Brenda was at home, likely preparing for another day at the hospital. Sydney was there too, unexpectedly, when she should have been at Mount Union, 50 miles away. Stephen, Sydney's father, had just received a call from the university that shattered their world. Sydney had been academically suspended. Her carefully constructed lie was unraveling. Stephen, confused and concerned, used a location-sharing app to find Sydney at home. He urged her to come clean to her mother. Brenda, ever the problem solver, picked up the phone to call Mount Union officials seeking answers. She stood in her kitchen, unaware that this call would be her last. As Brenda spoke, Sydney stood nearby, her panic rising. What was going through her mind? Was it fear of her mother's disappointment, or was it something darker, a voice in her head she couldn't silence? Then, in a moment that defies comprehension, Sydney snapped. She grabbed a cast iron skillet, a tool meant for family meals, and struck Brenda on the head. The sound of the blow echoed through the phone line, heard by horrified university officials. Brenda screamed, a cry of shock and pain, but Sydney didn't stop. She dropped the skillet and seized a steak knife, stabbing her mother nearly 30 times in the neck and head. The attack was ferocious, relentless, leaving Brenda with skull fractures and wounds so deep they ended her life almost instantly. University officials, frozen on the other end of the call, heard the chaos unfold. Thuds, screams, then silence. They called back, desperate to reach Brenda. On one attempt, someone answered, speaking in a voice that mimicked Brenda's. Was it Sydney, already trying to cover her tracks? The officials alerted police, and the Powell home, once a place of love, became a crime scene. How does a daughter raised with love commit such an act? The answer would only come in the days and years that followed. University officials, frozen on the other end of the call, heard the chaos unfold. Thuds, screams, then silence. They called back, desperate to reach Brenda. On one attempt, someone answered, speaking in a voice that mimicked Brenda's. Was it Sydney, already trying to cover her tracks? The officials alerted police, and the Powell home, once a place of love, became a crime scene. How does a daughter raised with love commit such an act? The answer would only come in the days and years that followed. Sydney was arrested and sent for psychiatric evaluation, where she remained for 2 weeks. Her father, Stephen, was left to grapple with an impossible reality. His wife was gone, and his daughter was responsible. The community of Akron was stunned. Brenda, a woman who had touched so many lives, was mourned deeply. Friends and co-workers shared stories of her kindness, while whispers of Sydney's mental state began to surface. Was this a calculated act of rage, or had something broken inside her? Sydney's attempt to cover up the crime, cleaning the scene, staging the break-in, suggested she knew what she'd done was wrong. But her defense team would argue something else, that Sydney wasn't in control, that her mind had betrayed her. As the case headed to court, the question wasn't just about guilt, it was about sanity, about whether a young woman could be held responsible for a mind that had turned against her. In September 2023, Sydney Powell faced trial in Summit County, Ohio. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. Stephen sat, torn between grief for his wife and love for his daughter. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Sydney, they argued, killed her mother to hide her academic failure, then tried to cover it up with cold calculation. They played the haunting audio from Brenda's final call, where her screams pierced the silence. The cast iron skillet and bloodied knife were presented, stark reminders of the violence. The defense admitted Sydney's actions but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. 3 psychologists testified that Sydney suffered from severe mental illnesses: schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder. They described a young woman tormented by voices calling her worthless, urging her to kill yourself. One expert called it one of the most severe cases they'd seen. Sydney herself spoke of flashes of memory, crying beside her mother, feeling trapped, hearing voices she couldn't escape. But the prosecution's expert, Sylvia Obradovich, disagreed. She argued Sydney was lucid, her cover-up showing she knew right from wrong. The jury faced an impossible question. Was this a calculated murder or a psychotic break? After days of testimony, they reached a verdict on September 20, 2023, guilty on all counts, 2 counts of murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Sydney, just 23, broke down in tears. On September 28, Judge Kelly McLaughlin sentenced Sydney to life in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. The judge acknowledged the brutality but noted Sydney's youth and lack of prior record. For Stephen, it was another loss. His daughter, now a convicted murderer, was gone from his life. But the story didn't end there. Sydney's legal team appealed, arguing the trial court erred by denying them a chance to counter new prosecution claims about her sanity. In December 2024, the 9th District Court of Appeals agreed, overturning the conviction and ordering a new trial. The decision sparked outrage from prosecutors, who appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court in February 2025. As of today, September 11, 2025, the case remains unresolved, with Sydney in custody, awaiting a decision that could mean freedom, retrial, or reinstatement of her sentence. The murder of Brenda Powell is more than a crime. It's a tragedy that shattered a family and left a community searching for answers. Brenda's love for her daughter was unwavering, but it couldn't protect her from the unimaginable. Sydney's story raises questions we may never fully answer. What drives a daughter to kill? Can a broken mind be held accountable? And how do we heal from a loss so profound? As the Ohio Supreme Court deliberates, the Powell family's pain lingers. Brenda's memory lives on in the lives she touched, while Sydney faces an uncertain future. This story reminds us that even in our closest bonds, darkness can hide, waiting for a moment to break free. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of the human heart, and let us know in the comments what you think about this heartbreaking case.